This is a chapter of my unpublished memoir, Dance Me Through the Panic, called Mercy Street. And it's about my fear of flat places. And in this chapter, my friends and I are about 23 years old, and it's 1993. Mercy Street. I awoke. A faint star in my window stared at me, a silver, constant eye. Jody and Jim were asleep, having crashed at my tiny apartment all weekend, and somehow they'd frightened off my panic. They gave my fear of open spaces and the night sky a short bout of amnesia. I scratched at my balls. Friends are medicine. I didn't want my medicine to leave, even though I hadn't said a word to them about my secret, that a door had opened in my head recently, and at any time, stars and the universe could rush in. At this time, I had no language or mental framework to process this unreal reality. And now, from afar, I see myself like a marionette figure lying on this bed, surrounded by my two friends. And though I had control of my life inside my apartment, if I walked out into the great theater of the outside at night, or into a vast open space like a parking lot or a beach shoreline, I'd transform into a petrified wooden puppet, to be pulled by strings light years long, shaken and twisted. Jim woke, crammed beside me, coughed. "Move over." Jesus. "You know," Jim said, pushing his legs against mine for more space, "as handsome as you are, I don't want to have sex with you." I laughed, happy to talk away my thoughts. Jody was asleep inside a rolled-up carpet, hair a sleeping vole. Empty cans of beer around him sprouted cigarette butts. "Well, I don't want to have sex with you either, Jim," I said, pushing his legs back on his side. Jim and I were fully awake now, talking about this, almost emotional, giddy about the lack of wanting to have sex with each other, and reconfirming we were like brothers. We recalled our trip out west, talked of our girlfriends. We rarely talked of Mattawa, where we had grown up. "Where?" I sang, lying back on my pillow. Sing that once more, Deegs." "Where you're..." "Peter Gabriel," Jim said. "That's Peter Gabriel. You know, Mercy Street was a poem by Anne Sexton first, but it's more Peter than Anne. We'd played this musical game for years. Where you're inside out," we sang together, Jim harmonizing. "Dreaming of Mercy Street. Where you're inside out." The single star went to sleep outside the large window in the branches of a maple tree. Jody's hair stirred. "Dreaming of mercy." Our voices still soft. "In your daddy's arms again." "Boys," Jody said, pushing off his carpet, dust rising up. "No singing before coffee, you know the rules." "Remember waking up in Nice on the beach?" I said to this man below. "I remember sand in my mouth, wind, the smell of your feet." Jim said, yawning and getting off the bed. "I should have gone with you guys." He lit a smoke at the beer can-filled table and prepared a bottle toke, laying the hash on the lit cig end, the oily ember starting to burn. "And when we woke up," Jody said, lying back, as if on that beach in France, hands behind his hair, "it was so hot, but we found that shade, remember? Best shade I'd have had since 1976. Jim said, 'Don't make me laugh when I'm trying to get high.' We all smoked up and I made eggs, and then at the doorway, Jody handed me a copy of The Wars by Timothy Finley, my new favorite book, he said. "Hey guys, look, you can totally crash another night," I said, trying to sound easygoing. But they had to go. After they left, I lay down stoned and sleepy in the deep quiet. The city became strange. In my stonedom, and to calm myself, I thought of our night and how after we'd played catch under the floodlights, 3 of us had read to each other and listened to music until it was almost dawn and said over and over again, "Love this guitar solo. You got to listen to this song, this piece of music. Hey, read this. It's beautiful. Check this out." Partly lying there stoned that morning and fearing going outside alone, but I think mostly long after this time, I realized that these songs, classical music, poems, books, were our expressions of love. I played them requiem moments, Mozart's and the Kyrie of Fauré's, and then cajoled them into quiet to hear the third movement of Beethoven's late A minor quartet, the entire opening before the change. The most beautiful shift in music ever written, I'd said, cocksure, so freed from panic or otherworldliness, but truly wanting them to hear the motif shift from darkness to light. At some point, Jim took out his acoustic and sang Bruce Colburn's All the Diamonds in the World, and before dawn, Jody read to us from The Lord of the Rings. All of these offerings, I think now, were emblems of our inside worlds, our inner cities, the old houses we still lived in inside our minds, but had never shared with one another, our streets of mercy, which were dark even to us, like burned out street lamps, but which we invited each other into through pages and melodies and lyrics. Hey, man, listen to this.
Welcome to this episode of What Kind of Man Are You? The podcast about men, masculinity, and how happy we are to be men, right, Degan?
Absolutely. This is Joy. Welcome to Joy.
Welcome to Joy.
And this is also going to be the last podcast in our first season. So we're going to end off, we did shame last time. And now we are opening our arms wide and we're heading into Joy.
You may recall in an earlier episode, Degan was like, please, can we talk about joy? So we're going to devote a whole episode to it.
Beautiful.
Do you want to talk about that opening passage?
Yeah. Until now, I've been reading a poem from my book, What Kind of Man Are You? Because this is the last episode and we are launching into other universes after this on the same subject, but we're going to look at the form and how we're going to do things for the next season. We thought we would just try a different form. And so I have a memoir, which I have just finished. I'm now just sending it out to publishers and the rest of it. And it is called Dance Me Through the Panic. And it's a study about panic and kind of memoir about my own experiences and becoming a therapist and that sort of thing. And so I chose this segment because this was myself and two friends who we were in our early 20s after I had begun having panic attacks and I had never shared with anyone what was going on. But I really just wanted to be around people. I wanted to be around my friends. And so this was this night of us, it's the morning after, but me thinking back to all the connections, what we were sharing. And so we weren't sharing joy of each other's friendship in a very overt way, but we were sharing songs and poems and music and ideas. And that was really, I think, going back to the very first episode of these podcasts when we talked about often men having objects that they congregated around to connect. We were sharing these lyrics and our favorite moments. And that was a kind of love. So when I think back on that time, first it was like a balm, BALM, for panic. And it was also incredible joy. I think back of how many times I've shared with you, Chris, songs I love or TV shows or moments or what have you. And yeah, it brings me a lot of joy to think about the way I did that as a teen or a man in my early 20s.
Yeah, and I think it's really easy in these days to focus on the problems of the world, of issues of culture and wars around the world. And being a man, I do believe it's hard to be a man these days. So we just want to end this season on a high note and talk about some positive things maybe that we feel about being men.
It's funny, just to say, when you say it's hard to be a man, it is sometimes, but I actually really feel pulled with, I have a busy life with kids and jobs and writing and everything, but I feel an enormous amount of joy in life.
Awesome.
Yeah, I really do. Yeah.
Do you want to maybe talk about where that comes from, why you feel that way?
Yeah. I'm in my early 50s and I feel like there's something about this age that feels like wherever I spend my energy, it's the place I want to spend it.
Mm.
And I think so much of my earlier life had been trying to figure out where to put my energy. And it just feels incredibly focused. And there's something about that that is rich. And there is the writer, Annie Dillard, says, what you do with your hours is what you do with your life.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's something about being attentive to those hours for me that is, when I reflect back, is, oh, life is good.
I'll tell a little story that starts off in a negative way, but I hope ends in joy. I guess it's June of 2023. So a little over a year ago, I was let go from a job that meant a lot to me.
Mm-hmm.
And there are lots of reasons why that happened. And I don't know that I'll ever be one of those people saying that losing my job was the best thing that ever happened to me. But I do think it was for the best. And certainly the way things were going, it was probably better that I wasn't going to continue there. And it wasn't terrible, but I set about looking for another job and figured, how hard could it be? I've had really progressively more responsible roles for most of my career and quite familiar with my field and very experienced. But it was not a good experience. It was very challenging, very demanding, very rough on my mental health. And in all of this, I was able to find some joy. Like, one thing I will say about not having a job all of a sudden, there's a level of freedom that is kind of unrecognizable. Maybe that I hadn't felt in 20 years. So there's one piece. But I got lots of interviews and I put on a suit more times than I care to remember, but nothing was coming through. And I was getting frustrated. And back in February, I had really had it. And I said to my wife, something's got to change. And we were going on a trip. And I said, when we come back, something changes. And that was...
Didn't you have a dream?
Oh, did I have a dream?
You told me.
Yes, I don't remember it though.
I might remember some of it. And it was immensely powerful. And I think it was around the time of that trip because I think you were either doing something with a large group of people and either leading or there was some immensity to it. And yeah, anyway, I remember a dream. I remember a dream shaking you and you talking about that as an impetus to actually begin this podcast or begin thinking differently about how you can find joy in a different way, how you can find your life in a different way.
That's right. There was a dream. I don't remember the details of it, but it did have a feeling of both ending and new beginnings. And when I came back, that was when it was March of this year. And that was when I approached you about doing this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And I started getting fired up about life again. Mm-hmm. And I've since, little bit of insider information here, I have since approached other people to do some other podcasts. So stay tuned for that. I will, as those things develop, I will keep people informed. But I've been getting really excited about my work again. And I went to, so I go for a monthly massage and it's one of those, it's
pure joy,
self-care. And my massage therapist, I got to know her pretty well. And one month I was just talking about what a hard time I was having, but I started talking about this these podcasts that I'm working on. She's like, oh, wow, that's so cool, blah, blah, blah. And I started telling her about it. And anyway, a month later, I went back and she's like, wow, you really look like a different person. And
Wow.
it's because I'd started recording with you.
Yeah.
And I was feeling joy about working. And as much as I tried, I really tried to not be angry about losing my job. And it's not that I wasn't trying to be angry. You can't really stop that. But it was more like I was trying to reason with myself that this is probably for the best and it's all going to work out in the end and blah, blah, blah. And sometimes it worked, but sometimes it was not effective. Sometimes I was just really angry. I was upset about not getting hired. And here I am feeling very much in control of what I'm doing next and talking about a subject that you and I have wanted to explore in depth for a large chunk of our friendship.
What strikes me here is we're talking about a hard-earned joy here. It almost like, and I don't want to make a cliche of it, but this is like end of job. Like when we talk about end of marriage, something, those kinds of moments where we are forced to reinvent ourselves. And we literally have two roads. My memoir is very much about these subjects as well. But so I've been thinking about it a lot. And this is this well-earned joy where you lose this job and then literally reinvent and say, I'm going to do this. And this is the beginning of the road of your reinvention, right? There will be many, right? I know you and I have started a magazine together. You're a writer. You've worked a number of jobs. This is now another iteration of you. And I think that just to say, there's a couple of books that come to mind. One by Thomas More, Moore, called Dark Nights of the Soul. And I read that book at a time when I was reinventing myself, moving after my marriage ended. And that was a very powerful book. And that idea of going into the forest, like Dante's famous line, I walked into the dark forest and I was not sure which way to go.
Right.
And that's where you were at in February, and in March you find some light through the trees. And there's something, another phrase for this period of time, like the middle years. There's another book called The Middle Passage by author James Hollis, which is very much how do we change? And I think that's this really deep turning into, okay, where will I go next? And there's that. And then there's like the dailiness of joy, right? There's like, how do we find it? And I've been reading a book called Inciting Joy by Ross Gay. Rossgay, Ross Gay. He's a poet from the United States. And I wanted to read a little bit. He asked in this book, what incites joy? And he answers that and says, I'm going to talk about pickup basketball and skateboarding and school and time and gardening and music and things like that. And then he says afterwards, what does joy incite? And he says in the end, joy actually incites unbounded solidarity. Like the joy itself leads to connection, because it draws people in and it amplifies itself and grows. But I wondered if we could switch for a moment to what you've expressed here is this big, huge tectonic plate shift toward a new continent of joy, and things are the daily things. And I wonder what gives you joy. I thought we could just exchange some pieces of things, moments that have given us joy, particularly as men or seeing men being joyful in life.
Sure. Well, you start.
Sure. I've been thinking about what makes me just light up thinking about being a man or men in general. And I think one of the themes underneath is that the script, which we talk about so much, it tells us that we're not too overly enthusiastic about things, right? We don't express ourselves in an effusive kind of overly joyful way often. So whenever I find a man expressing something in whatever way, shape, or form that is about something that really means something to them, I'm always really touched by that. And I wanted to give a few examples. So this was probably a couple of years ago. I was biking through U of T down from Harvard Street through, is it King's College Circle?
Yep.
Yeah, King's College Circle. And there were some arborists there with their big machinery and the ladder and their chainsaws. And I was walking or biking and I stopped and looked up at these trees. And I just said to the person, "Are you cutting this down? Is there something wrong with the tree?" And he just stopped and put his chainsaw down and said, "These are the most beautiful trees in the city. There's not a chance. We're just trimming branches." But there was something in his eye as he said it, this deep love with it. And I think you don't often hear that, especially from a stranger. And I just felt, I love that moment. And so I've been writing down a couple of beautiful ones like that. These are ones for me. Like, what gives me joy? Finding a great shirt at Value Village. Like I and shop all the time. Or I do have a very good pair of Italian shoes that I still love, and they're falling to pieces, but I still get them like re-sewn at the bottom because they feel so good. Brown leather and they're like honestly 20 years old. And I remember I haven't bought myself new clothes for a while, but a beautiful blazer from Zara on special for $200. But just that European fit. There's something about that. I remember a long time ago. Do you remember the site, The Sartorialist? I don't know.
Only because you told me about it.
Yeah. It's just a site around men's fashion, but it includes the most wonderful. Some of it is Milan and Paris. And think, okay, this is like if people have a lot of money. There's also people who just dress really well that really express themselves in this way. He does men and women. And I would always go through the men's fashion and just be taken with these people that were just wearing clothes that really express themselves. I thought there was a lot of joy in that. And I'd say a little something else. This is maybe less specific to a particular object or something, but I think going back to the piece I read, my friends and I were listening to each other. We were offering something and we were listening. And I think to be really listened to in what you're offering, either yourself or something that you love, is such a human need to have that exchange. And I think there's so much joy in that, to share it and to receive it. There's a line of poetry, "Listening is a form of love." That's from a poet named Spencer Reese. And so I just think in the sense of what our friendship thing about the act of therapy, which I think in a way is a kind of form of joy and love. There's something in really being heard. And I think for men, because we don't express a lot, when the light comes through the cracks, these little places, I really stand by the warmth of it because it feels special.
Apropos of nothing, but that line about, what is it? Something about cracks.
Oh yeah. There's a crack in everything. That's where the light gets in, Leonard.
Yeah. Leonard Cohen is credited with it, but you know who said it first?
No.
Groucho Marx.
Oh yeah.
I had no idea. I looked that up once and it was like,
talk about ambassadors of joy.
Yeah, exactly.
That's beautiful. Yeah. He sings that. You can steal much more readily in songs, I think, than you can in poems. It's funny we have that because that's from, I think, Democracy, the song Democracy.
Oh, is it?
And you can borrow, although I'm just looking at a novel here of W.G. Sebald, and he said you can steal from anything. He said it joyfully in the interview, so maybe he's right. So Ross Gay was a football player for about 4 years and talks a lot just about the violence of football and also the camaraderie. And there was a moment where he's been hit really hard on the field and he's wavering and his body is about to go down. And his colleague, his teammate, just touches his back and rights him and he stays up. And there was no eye contact, no talk about it afterwards. It was just that. And I think I felt a lot of joy in that. And this is, I think, very much about when we talk about being socialized, being men. We've talked so much in this podcast about how the lack of expression is difficult. It's difficult in relationships. I've been talking a lot about the need to go in and have this heroic journey inward and be able to express ourselves. And I think in thinking about this podcast, I quite love this understated way that men can be. And it feels very calming to me that there are these gestures, which are gestures of love or care or support, which don't have a lot of fireworks to them. So I feel like I think I enjoy, that part of being a man.
Yeah. So, what I would like to do is maybe take a break right now,
Yes. Wonderful.
and then we can come back and I will share some little bits of joy.
Wonderful.
Okay. Welcome back to What Kind of Man Are You? The Joy Edition. So, Degan, my turn. You were talking about moments of joy in the everyday. I can think about that in terms of there are lots of ways I experience that. And one of them is cooking. And there's a lot of talk about how men like to work with their hands. I think in general, working with your hands it's just something so different from working with your mind only. And the stereotype of men is that they like to do woodwork, or I don't know, like to build things or whatever. And I don't like to do any of that, but I do like to cook. And I mentioned to you unrecorded that Mary and I had a guest, a student from Afghanistan, who stayed with us for a week until she could get into her apartment. And beyond it being a really eye-opening experience and having a chance to host someone who has had a vastly different experience from myself, we talked about, of course, we talked about food, and she mentioned biryani, and I was intrigued, and she was talking about what it was. I've had biryani before, but only at a takeout Pakistani restaurant. I really liked it, but it had been a long time. I was intrigued, so I decided to try it out. And she couldn't believe that I was trying it. And I had so much fun doing that. And it was just so nice because one of the things we were wondering is, what should we feed her? Is she going to be weirded out by our North American diet? Or
Right.
I will say she did take to maple syrup right away. So we didn't really know what to do. She likes bread. Anyway, we worked it out. But I really felt, if I can do this right, it'll be a treat for her. And I think she really enjoyed it. At least she said she did. So she's either very polite or genuinely liked it.
Didn't she say you overspiced the rice? But I think
yes,
you genuinely enjoy it.
Yeah, she did enjoy it. She exactly said that. And also I put raisins in there, and that shouldn't have been in there, but I really enjoyed it, and it tasted really good. But even the act of making it, it's cooking is one of those places where I really feel, that sense of flow, right? It's probably one of 2 or 3 activities I can do where I can completely immerse myself in it. And I just love that feeling where your whole attention is focused on that. Wow. And just making sure I didn't have all the right ingredients, so I had to improvise. And I love that about cooking. And then having people like it or not is a bit of a reward, but cooking is one of those things for me that really is its own reward.
Yeah. And it makes me think, when I was talking about this Inciting Joy book, and he talks about what incites joy, and then what does joy incite, like this idea that you love it. And I've come over to your house many times where you've made an incredible meal, and that's joy beyond into others.
That's really true. There is that feeling of sharing what you've done with people you care about. And there is a joy in that. It's joy piled upon joy. So when I'm cooking, that's definitely a time I really do feel that. And in fact, there was a time where I would get all freaked out about not getting something right. And especially if I was having someone over, and some of that is just building experience and confidence. But also I think there's a lot of letting go that you need to do with cooking, because sometimes you are going to screw up a step or you're going to forget to buy a ingredient.
That is so true. You talk about ingredients, like how we find joy. In my work at the Michener Institute as a counselor, I'm often working with people who are perfectionists, students who are perfectionists. And it seems like literally one of the ingredients of joy is to let go of this idea of something being perfect.
Yeah.
And because you are bound into this like tightness with this thing that you want to produce, whether it's a mark or project or a meal. And it's like the joy gets drained out of it. And this idea that can you be gentler with yourself and absolutely enjoy it.
I think that when you are not fully aware, you think that perfectionism is just a desire to get it right. But perfectionism is actually an impediment to getting it right, because the idea that it has to be perfect becomes like your obstacle. And that's definitely something I've let go of early on with cooking, but even with writing, even with podcasting, these sorts of things, like all the stresses I had about what if I do this wrong or what if I do that wrong.
This is a turn, Chris. But
okay.
I was thinking about a poet being filled with joy, and the poet Walt Whitman, great American poet who writes these long lines, right? That's very much his style. And I've got a couple of lines and I want to read them. And I feel like he does have, of course, a beautiful measure as a poet, but he also spills over the edge of that. And I feel like he's a poet. I think about the American project, at least, from Mayflower on, the colonial American project. And I think he was like the great heart of so much of that. And I don't think of him as a perfectionist. I think of him as this singer of the body, singer of the soul. And I just want to read a couple of lines. These are well-known lines. I sing the body electric. The armies of those I love engirth me and I engirth them. And later, the love of the body of man or woman balks account. The body itself balks account. That of the male is perfect. That of the female is perfect. The expression of the face balks account. The expression of a well-made man appears not only in his face, it is in his limbs and joints also. It is curiously in the joints of his hips and wrists. And he goes on, and Walt Whitman, of course, was loved men. We took men as lovers. And so he's paid a lot of attention. But there's something about these kind of flowing lines that to me seem like he's a man who took incredible joy in the world and in all aspects of it. He has a lot of list poems where he'll talk about the indigenous peoples close to him, the men who are soldiers. He was writing around the time of the Civil War. When you think about it, a time of incredible unrest. And somehow he kept seeing the joy, the possibility, the beauty of existence. And anyway, I mentioned that because he seems particularly a poet of light and that. We were talking about beat poetry earlier, Ginsberg and Kerouac and all those. And he almost seems in I Sing the Body Electric a bit like a really early beat poet. And he did. I think he didn't hitchhike around because there were no cars, but he jumped on trains and he wandered and he spent time with the men who were fighting and all the rest of it. So he was one of those wanderers in that way. Yeah. There's something beautiful there. I've been thinking a lot about the United States and America, and there's always so many sides, right? You think about Donald Trump, who seems so joyless. Talk of him recently. Does he actually laugh, except when he's really laughing at somebody else or demeaning them in some way? But then you have the opposite of that in this sort of, in America, and which is this abundance, this incredible joy.
In fact, that is a primary message of the Democratic Party right now, is joy. And they're using it strategically. And thank God, it's about time. Let's make our politics about something other than grievance.
And you can feel it, can't you? You can feel the change really as soon as Biden dropped out, that sense. It's a curious piece, isn't it? How the waves of hope and for something different and a message that is not two ancient men battling on stage. It's lifted up the continent. I think it, in a way, in a strange way, for us who sleep beside the lion,
the elephant, stand on the sidelines. Trudeau had his sunny ways. I'm not so sure he's going to bring sunny ways back to the next campaign. Let's hope for some joy in next year's election. I wanted to get back to, because when you talked about Walt Whitman, a lot of that energy, actually, a lot of people get their joy from their religious community or their religious beliefs and faiths. That's not really something that is true for me, but I will say that I find a lot of joy in finding peace. One of the things that I do sometimes is you were talking about people you read. I was thinking about the Buddhist leader Thich Nhat Hanh. And I would say that he died recently, but I don't think that he would consider it dying. He would consider it continuing on to his next existence. But he talks in very simple terms and really about, like you said, finding the joy in every day and sitting and watching a leaf in the fall as it clings to the tree and then separates when the wind just blows it strong enough and like floats to the ground. And, those kinds of things, for me, just reading that can bring me to a place of peace that gives me a lot of joy. And sometimes I'll put on a YouTube of him talking. I don't even listen to what he's saying. His voice is just so easy to listen to and so both assured and calm at the same time. It's something that really takes me right back into my body, brings me to a place that feels like home no matter where I am. And related to that, the sense of body. I talked about using my hands, but also I like to run. And a lot of people will listen to music when they run because it keeps their energy up, and it can actually be really helpful in maintaining a certain pace. But I really love to run, and I love to run for a long time, although I'm not as good at it as I used to be. And I just love that feeling of moving in space and my body being something that can take me to other places. And that awareness, and so you have these, because distance running is also a mind game. You have to talk to yourself and say you can keep going, or listen to your body and say, okay, there's something wrong. Can I run through it, or do I need to go home? And there are moments of just, again, it's that feeling of just being in myself, being where, who, how I want to be, and nothing else. And whether that be like listening to someone very calming to me talk, or moving my body through space, or even being affectionate with my wife, all those things where it's just the moment everything slows down and becomes that moment. And the only other thing I had written down here was being by water. And I think it's the same experience, either a river or watching waves come up to the shore of a lake or the ocean. It's that same feeling where I don't go far from where I am right now. And the joy, that's where the joy is for me. If I start to get pulled in a lot of directions, or I start to freak out about things, obviously it's less joyful.
I love that you began your own story about the job and about finding yourself, reinventing, and then now coming to these very small, like seemingly small moments of just like watching a leaf And it sounds so simple, but I think it's really true. And sometimes I'll just walk into the city and I might have a vague notion, or I'll go and, I don't know, have a tea or coffee or something. But just to be like taking in the city and glancing at things and not rushing it seems those are the moments of aliveness, I agree in that, just the simple ways to find that kind of joy and how replenishing it is.
Mm-hmm. I want to break there.
Yeah, we'll break there. And we'll be back shortly for the end of the podcast.
Okay. All right, we are back for our final segment of our first season. Degan, should we start with questions or should I try my dad joke on you?
I like the questions. Do you have a question for me?
I have a question for you, which isn't personal so much as something I'm trying to understand, which is, given the theme of our episode, what do you see the difference being between joy and happiness? Because I hear a lot of people talk back and forth about these two things, and I'd love to hear your take on that.
Yeah. I've never thought about this, so I'm just going to riff.
Okay.
You'll riff. What's first coming to mind is that happiness seems more like a deep rooted kind of, how do I want to live my life as a man, as a father, in a way that's going to sustain me. And the idea of happiness being like I've thought a lot about happiness, I think. And to me, it's like one of the things about being in my 50s now, which I really love, is that I feel like the immediate gratification thing, I'm not as interested in it anymore. I'm interested in, okay, like last night I went to sleep earlier than I have been. I feel so much better today. I am so happy because of that. But it's like these kind of structural pieces. And this idea of choosing to be an adult, which is, I think, all the way through my 20s and 30s and parts of the 40s, it was, screw it, I'm going to stay up late. This is what I want to do. And of course, I still do that sometimes and whatever. But there's something about making these decisions that in the moment feel like a downer, but to be like, oh my God, I feel great today after this. I'm going to be working on my novel for a while. That gives me a kind of happiness that is, it's like it's ingrained into life. And it's always easy, right? I'm working on it. And this is my first novel and I'm so in it at the moment. And just over the last few days, actually, it was giving me there were a lot of questions and this feeling in my body like, okay, this scene is not working and I didn't know how to solve it. And I stayed with it. And I mean, at times it's pretty agonizing. It's all the thoughts of shame come like, should I even be doing this? Is this even worth it? And then when I stayed with it and thought of a couple of changes, it suddenly all flowed back to life. I wrote quite a bit and it was super exciting. And that, to me, that was happiness in the adult sense of, okay, I can look at my life and say, this is how I'm living now. And joy, I'm sure joy can rub shoulders. You could do the Venn diagram or whatever. There's lots of connection in it. Joy to me, I think if I'm just riffing on this, feels like the moment itself that is full of kind of wonder or really good things. Like last night or yesterday, I went with my twins and a friend and her daughter, and we went to Toronto Island. And there were moments like just looking out at the water and seeing the beautiful sparkles on the water. And it made me think of something a friend of mine had said a few weeks back when she was looking at the lake. I just want to eat those sparkles. It was so beautiful. And so to me, I think joy is like eating the sparkles in the moment, taking them in. It was really hot for a moment. We went into the Ward's Island beach and it was so cool and wonderful. And the kids are playing. And that was just like pure unadulterated joy, So I guess that's how I'm defining them.
I have thought about this a lot and I have heard the definition of one or the other being the feeling you get when something good happens in your life. And then the other being your attitude towards things, and it's not just the attitude, but the kind of way you approach life. So some people will say that one of those is happiness and one of those is joy. And I've heard both applied to either one. But I think a lot of people say we spend too much time worrying about happiness. And in my mind, it's like, why is that a bad thing? But I think the idea is really, are things happening to me that make me happy enough? And that's where I think it's like, that's just an endless, fruitless pursuit in a sense. But if you bring a joyful attitude, then happiness is it's not a goal so much as the approach you take to life, which I really try. Sometimes it's harder than other times. But so I don't even know which word applies to which, but that's how I differentiate. So I mentioned Thich Nhat Hanh, and he talks about bringing compassion and joy to everything you do. I would add kindness. I feel like kindness and compassion are closely related, but compassion is more of a way of seeing it, and kindness, I feel, is more the action side of it. And I guess in that way, joy is your way of being, and happiness is how you're going to feel if you're able to bring that joy as often as you can. So I guess that's how I'm going to define it for now. We'll see how I feel tomorrow.
I love thinking about Thich Nhat Hanh and thinking about compassion and joy. And also, it just seems, obviously, we spend so much of our lives, particularly in a big city, racing from one place to the other and being on phones. And just there's something about walking, for me, if I take an evening where I don't have anything planned or one thing planned, or just, I started before the summer, which became hectic with kids and schedules and stuff. I was walking to work once or twice a week and taking a full hour to walk there. And there was something so joyful about that. And that might have been just like, I don't know, seeing someone's face, hearing a snatch of conversation, seeing the trees. I don't know, something really simple, or just feeling in your body. And then looking at seeing how many steps I walked, which is the 10,000, that kind of thing. Well, listen, this leads to the question I have for you.
Oh, okay.
Because I've always thought, because the school year begins in September, it's always felt to me like that September is more the new year than January.
Yeah.
And of course, in the Jewish tradition, you have Rosh Hashanah, year and everything. And so I would like to ask you, as the new year, in this kind of new year comes upon us, are there any intentions you have for it, for yourself? Plans or ways of thinking or being that you're thinking of?
I think in some ways my question was an answer to your question, in the sense that I'm not big on New Year's resolutions or anything. I tend to just have wishes for the upcoming year. And yeah, there are 3 times that feel renewing in the year. One is now with the new school year. And as you say, it's the Jewish New Year. There's New Year's Day, January 1st. And then there's spring, where everything is starting to grow again. And each of those times of year, I don't necessarily always consciously do it, but I will start to develop feelings of wishing for something, how things are going to be different. Maybe really, this is a whole new time for me, because I'm starting a little podcast enterprise here.
Empire.
This is one of a couple of podcasts I am starting. And this is the first one where we've actually recorded and done a season, but I have 2 more that I'm working on. And so I think in some ways I would like to live some of the stuff we've been talking about in this episode, bring a sense of joy, bring a sense of live my values, which is, I worked for a university, a very large university for a long time. And you try to live your values there, but you come up against bureaucracy and the frustrations of hierarchy. And maybe what I'm hoping here is to live my values and share joy and kindness with the people I work with and in the work I do.
It makes me think too, the very beginning of this podcast, I read that piece about my friends and I in our 20s sharing music and songs and that, like a kind of harkening back to that very first podcast we did, the idea of like men often using some medium to express emotions and connection, and I say that without any judgment, and make me think I'd love you and I to meet again and do what we love to do every couple of months, which is sit down have a drink and play music, one song after another.
Oh yeah.
Hear those songs.
Yeah, we haven't done that in a while.
No, we've done that in so many places. We've done it outside Peterborough. We've done it cabin in Flesherton. We've done it in our houses. And it's, I think, on one of my birthdays. And it's so fun because we have this medium of voice, and we have the entirety of the history of music at our fingertips with YouTube and Spotify. And we just go on this journey, and they're just some of my favorite moments. So that's one of my intentions then for the fall. Let's get a time and do that.
Okay. I will add that to my list too.
So you had a joke, I believe.
Yeah. One other intention I have is to tell you another dad joke. This is my own joke. So I didn't even steal this off the internet. So I think I've talked to you about how I've gotten into coffee in the last couple of years. And now I make my own coffee on the stovetop with a mocha pot. But you also know that for the longest time, I was only a tea drinker. Now I'm both. And it took, like, at first I would just throw a bag in a mug and pour hot water over it. And that was tea. I realized it's really hard to make good tea. And it took me a while to really make good tea. But you know what? I forgive myself because it's a steep learning curve.
All right. I was wondering where this was going to come in. All right. Honorary debt.
I could have made that a short joke, but I had to
Yeah. I was wondering.
I'm a storyteller at heart.
Being ambushed by a dad joke. Like you think you're walking down the street and it's safe. And then, All right. Listen, Chris, this has been a wonderful season. Thank you for asking me to share the pieces of my poems. Great joy, great happiness, all of that. And thank you for sharing these pieces. It's been a gamut of intimacy, interiority, and joy, and just, I love doing it with you. Our friendship means the world to me. Yeah.
I'm glad. I agree. And I'm glad we're ending this on a joy topic because it really has been a joy to do this. And I feel like I'm learning as I go, which is the thing that I really enjoy the most in the world is learning. So it's been a pleasure, and asking you questions and hearing your perspectives on some of the things that we may talk about casually, but actually formalizing it a little in this podcast has been really fascinating and exciting. So thank you.
We'll see you on the other side.
Hi, everyone. This is Chris. I'll read the credits shortly, but I wanted to send out a big thank you on behalf of Degan and myself to those who have contributed to this podcast, our friends, family, and random listeners who have donated their money, their time, or their ideas. This is a labor of love so far, at least, and this is not a money-making venture for us, so your support is so valuable. We're super passionate about this podcast, and we have learned so much just by talking about the subject. This first season has been a journey within, where we share our own experiences and readings, and now we'd like to expand our scope. So send us your suggestions for other topics or guests. And now, the credits. Thank you for listening to What Kind of Man Are You? The podcast is hosted by Degan Davis and Chris Garbett. Produced by Chris Garbett and VQC Media. Music by Degan Davis. We would love your feedback. Check out the show notes for ways to get in touch with us, leave a comment, or email us at chris@vqcmedia.me. Contact Chris about advertising and sponsorship opportunities. If you like what you hear, tell your friends, and please give us a thumbs up or a 5-star rating on your favorite platform. Subscribe now to get updates on Season 2 coming later in the fall.
Is a C9, E, G, B, and D. So I'm doing that with the A.